It is an honor to be in the midst of you and to be with you, knowing some of the people who have been a part of your congregation. I have an unadulterated love of you already, and respect for the incredible work that you do. So if you would, reflect with me. May my words call forward the angels of our better nature, so that our collective hearts discern a deeper wisdom, move us to action, to seek with persistence transformative justice, and in love, lead us to weave together a beloved community. Indian author and activist Arundhati Roy referenced the pandemic as a portal, a gateway between one world and the next, a way to break with the past to imagine something new. Adrienne Marie Brown, in Growing a Garden of Healing Ideas, writes that in the struggle for transformative justice, we need science fiction to help us imagine how are we going to live in this moment and all future moments. In Octavia Butler's book, Parable of the Sower, the young protagonist Lauren must decide what she will take with her, what is essential in the face of apocalypse. We are being goaded, encouraged by the wise ones of our age to imagine what a new world might look like as the old world becomes undone, institutions and infrastructure failing and unraveling. Something is amiss, and we can feel it. It may well be that people in our age are reaching for extremism because they feel the unraveling happening too. And in the face of such failing and unraveling, they hear rational and official statements as just window dressing that doesn't speak to the larger issues. Some of us may remember a few years back the low-budget horror movie, The Blair Witch Project. The movie was made with an outline of the script, sending 3 unknown actors out into the Maryland woods to improvise the legend of the Blair Witch, to suggest that the 3 young adults were actually doing a documentary that had moviegoers asking, wait a minute, was that real? Was what they experienced real? Did they go out into the woods with something that began as fictional, but which now is proved by whatever frightful thing is out in those woods? That back and forth wondering made the movie wildly popular as media, the actors, and supposed experts planted questions about the reality of the movie, and therefore the legend of the Blair Witch. Were they actors? Or did the movie just chronicle strange experiences? My understanding is that in several movie theaters before the movie even began, a low hum like the loud running of a refrigerator was played to unnerve and unsettle moviegoers. I remember it being like the sound of a mosquito in my ear, wishing it would end, trying to get it out of my ear, but preparing me to be uneasy about this Blair Witch, her existence, and what the heck is really going on out in those woods. Something was not quite right. And that feeling of being unsettled and unnerved made moviegoers easy prey to be scared and afraid. Something is really wrong. We are living in a time where that low hum in the background is becoming louder and louder. The pandemic certainly had and continues to have us on edge. Rising inequality and the decline of mental health seem to be ramping alongside one another. Our country just came out of the longest running war in our history and is currently supplying weapons for adjudicated genocide in Gaza. Climate scientists are regularly sounding the alarm around climate apocalypse and its tipping points. The recent shooting in Georgia, the stop and detainment of Miami Dolphins receiver Tyreek Hill, the way that trans people are being demonized, and the way law enforcement engages all of these peoples who are vulnerable, all of that makes us mindful of how routine violence is for many people in our country. Now, AI has some people working in the field question whether Artificial intelligence will lead to human extinction. And one of the current presidential candidates is doing his level best to promise an authoritarian fascist reign if he is elected. So people will stop eating cats. Political philosopher Eric Voegelin does not believe that the German people were mesmerized and seduced by Adolf Hitler, that Hitler had some special gifts that made him right for the moment. Rather, Voegelin believes that Hitler and his grotesque marginal figures surrounding him were supported because he represented wider society's zeitgeist. Something is fundamentally wrong, and we can feel it in our bones. That blasted refrigerator is loud and continues to run, and there are people who tell us all we have to do is a little soundproofing here or window treatment there, and all will be well. And down deep, we know that is not true. But the demagogue tells us what we can feel at another level. Something is fundamentally wrong. All feels like it is unraveling. All feels like it is collapsing. We have boundless untapped energy to make the needed changes necessary, but that feels like hard work. We don't want it to be wasted work because we know there are so many charlatans and pretenders out there offering to save the world. Hey, maybe a new fridge with advanced AI. Or another used car salesman who tells us how our fridge could provide passive income if we just go to this site. Not unlike how cereal boxes would try to enlist us for the latest sweepstakes. These shooting stars we hope for in the capitalist system. And so we reach for the window dressing and whatever might give us the temporary dopamine hit that might help us to get by one more day, ignore the constant hum while we see others reaching for the demagogue. It was political scientist Hannah Arendt who often talked about loneliness as a precondition for fascism. Some of the reality of our current age is many of our anxieties and fears, feelings of isolation and loneliness, they're very real. And our messengers, the wider media, seem to be telling us that we have one or two choices, all with a romantic version of returning us to a normal or a new normal. We can either acknowledge at a base level that something is really wrong, not sustainable, and plunge headlong into fascism to bring security and resolve our fear of the outsider. One whole sector of the media is trying to scare us into effectively getting the gas-guzzling Hummer. Or we can do a reformist, positivist window dressing which allows for a soft fascism that protects us from the deeper plunge. All we need is a new tune-up and some incentives for electric cars. On a visceral level, we know that something is wrong, that the center is not holding, and that so much is beginning to unravel. In the chaos and the whirlwind, we can feel in our bones that something is happening. The constant hum of all of these can make us easy prey for fear of engaging the wider world, fear of engaging systemic and structural injustice and evil, and at the most basic level of fear of one another. And primary to the work of faith communities, like First Unitarian in South Bend, is to counter these fears with your hard work. As a faith leader, I believe I am charged with curating my regular reflection and dialogue to share with you and challenge us all to wider wisdom, action, and celebration, that there is another way. Run through so many of the wisdom givers of our age is a call to weave together the commons, to reach out our hand in solidarity, and to adopt or continue practices of grief, awe, and wonder. Organizer of the Debt Collective, Astor Taylor, argues that anxiety is a defining feature of our time, and that's not by accident. Our economic and political systems cultivate that anxiety, build and perpetuate that anxiety. One of the ways our systems and structures have historically done that is through the destruction of the common. The common is the place where we can all come together to discern truth among diverse voices. The common is the safe place to be different, but to hash out our common struggles, celebrate our common joys, and enjoy learning and growing from one another in our diverse, strange, and goofy selves. The common is also the place where we provide a safe place for the most vulnerable. The common is not for sale. In fact, Taylor says, the legend of Robin Hood and Sherwood Forest may come from resistance to the destruction of the common. Forests in the medieval world were often a place for refuge and resource for the most vulnerable. Whatever food could be foraged, whatever shelter could be secured, those outcast and vulnerable might be able to find it in the forest. Then Prince John comes into the picture and wants to move Sherwood Forest from a common to property of the crown. And Robin Hood and his merry men in resistance are all about making sure Sherwood Forest remains a common. National parks, libraries, public schools have historically been a part of our common, and we must be people who have a transcendent imagination to not only resist the trespass and the overreach of the royalty, we must radically extend more and more commons out further into our communities. We must do so with intentional, engaged work to not only make our places of faith a commons, but to find places where we can weave together intergenerational, multicultural, and multiracial places where we discern, discuss, argue, develop consensus, and learn to love on one another as foundational for piecing together transformational justice. It's already happening and bringing powerful meaning to those who are engaged. At the DNC convention in Chicago this summer, as marches began demanding the recognition of Palestinian humanity, one person reflected, you know, there was a moment Wednesday when I was marching by this group that was extremely energetic. And the chant leads were a black man that I know from organizing circles, some younger Arab folks from Bridgeview, and some elders, including an auntie in a full thobe. And they were sort of switching off chant leads, and everyone was jumping and chanting together. There was so much grief and rage, but also joy in that solidarity. I don't think that any pageantry on the inside of the DNC, any sort of celebrity culture or worship of the ruling class, matches the kind of solidarity that we've built with each other on the street. You could see it so clearly in that moment with folks chanting and singing together, coming from such diverse lived experiences, from very different worlds, but sharing a sense of unity around their demands for justice. Out on the street in their protest and develop process of shared values, they had pieced together a common. As the root word of community, we need strong and vibrant intergenerational, multicultural, multiracial commons, plural and expanding, to remember we are willing to do the hard work and protest, binding together and love. As Cornel West always says, justice is love with legs on, what love looks like in public. As I read the wisdom givers and remote spiritual mentors across my curated media, they are calling us in this time to resist and defend the commons, remaining while also asking us to mend, weave, and piece together more and more intergenerational, multicultural, and multiracial commons across our communities. And hear this. This is a tough thing to say. Our faith communities may be too set in their habits, their music, their culture, to realistically be that place. We may have to create commons outside these places and continue to radiate out further into the world. Similarly, I also hear those wisdom givers and remote spiritual mentors calling us all to solidarity. We must reach out beyond our families, social networks, ethnicities, and race to other people who share our values around welcoming the stranger, confronting violence and hate, liberating all peoples into full humanity and equality, and loving this good earth and its animals as water protectors and land defenders. We must reach out and hold on, not let go. Love shows up in presence, in curiosity, and so that we might be transformed by the other. Climate activist Bill McKibben says on the regular that the number one thing we can do to begin our climate activism is to stop being an individual. We must be more than those old missionary models which assumed we knew better, had us acting like tourists to bip in and bip out, and not learn a darn thing about what it is to grieve the loss of others, to celebrate the joy of others, to have fun in imaginative and creative ways, to dance with the music of people we have not known before. It was Black Panther leader, become emeritus professor Angela Davis, who talked about the great hope the Black Lives Matter movement gave her on the street. Why? Because for the first time in her life, she saw a number of young white people turning out into the street, risking their lives in solidarity. She mentioned the Native leaders who were rightfully taking their place to help define a movement. It was Dr. Sandra Steingraber, a climate scientist, a member of the LGBTQAI community, who participated in the protest against the largest financier of fossil fuel expansion at Citibank's headquarters in New York City. Over several weeks, young adults had planned the Summer of Heat campaign as an organized campaign, and the entrance to Citibank had become a commons in solidarity. Dr. Steingraber and I had a short conversation celebrating one of those young organizers, Sarah Lassoff, who had dressed up as an orca one day to ridicule wealth disparity, and as a Costco hot dog another day to protest Costco's relationship with Citibank. She spent her time as a hot dog handing out Costco cookies to Citibank employees. Dressed up in her lab coat a following day, Dr. Steingraber held hands with other climate scientists to prevent entrance into Citibank headquarters in the morning, got arrested for that, was let go in the afternoon, knew that the protest was still going on, and so returned to the protest, hold hands, and she got arrested again. Because, she says, she is willing to go to jail for the future of her kids. As a New York Times war correspondent, Chris Hedges saw some of the worst parts of our world, the deep, dark waters of our worst world. Hedges writes about a time during the Bosnian War in what used to be Yugoslavia between 1992 and 1995. The Bosnian War was fought between Muslims, Croats, and Bosnian Serbs, sometimes between people who had been neighbors with each other before the war began. In a world where so many people are drawn to war, when a war is one of the primary forces that gives our life meaning, Chris Hedges believes there's only one force strong enough to counter the force of war. Hedges defines it by telling the story of Fidel Fezjek. Though Rosa and Draga Sorak would like to tell you how evil the Muslim people are, they cannot because of Fidel Fezjek. Rosa and Drago Sorak are a Bosnian Serb couple who lived in the Muslim village of Gorazda when their ethnic group, the Serbs, began shelling the city and cutting off daily necessities. Though the couple refused to throw their lot in with those who bombed the city, the Muslim police in Gorazda took their son, Zoran, away for questioning. And Zoran never came back. Their second son was struck by a car and killed. Muslims in Gorazda harassed the Sorak family, came to their apartment looking for them to kill them. 5 months after their oldest son's disappearance, Zoran's disappearance, Zoran's wife gave birth to a baby girl. The mother was unable to nurse the child. Food shortages in Gorazda were killing infants, the infirm, and the elderly in droves. The baby, with only tea to drink, began to fade. In that visceral age, with the baby close to death, Fidel Fezjek, a Muslim man who had been milking his cow at night to avoid the shelling, brought them a liter of milk. Fidel came day after day for 442 days until the Sorak daughter-in-law and their granddaughter left town for Serbia. Milk was a precious commodity in a time when salt was going for $80 a kilo. Fidel refused their money. All told, Fidel gave the Soraks around 221 liters of milk. Fidel was told by fellow Muslims to give his milk to their people and let the Chetnik children die. He did not say a word. He loyally, persistently, steadfastly, relentlessly delivered milk to people who were not like him, but were part of his community. He helped create a space for thriving and rest. After the war, Hedges found Fidel selling rotten apples to try to make it in the world. And his last question to Hedges, learning that Hedges had seen the Sorax, was, "And the baby, how is she?" Fidel regularly, consistently, relentlessly, and persistently held out his hands across ethnicity and faith to offer solidarity. It was Audre Lorde, writer and activist, who stated, "You do not have to be me in order for us to fight alongside each other. I do not have to be you to recognize that our wars are the same. What we must do is commit ourselves to some future that can include each other and to work toward that future with the particular strengths of our individual identities. And in order to do this, we must allow each other our differences at the same time as we recognize our sameness." Hold hands and don't let go. Find a place where your love and your curiosity and courage intersect. Hold your hands out and do not let go. Finally, as we live in this visceral age, we will need healthy practices of grief, awe, and wonder. Though we may come out on the other side of this visceral age healthier, bound more strongly together as a people and planet, we are at a time of continuing tremendous loss. Mass extinction is going on at this moment. War and famine, rage, risk, and nonviolent confrontation may require further losses of comfort, freedom, and maybe even lives. Landmarks of diverse and tremendous beauty are melting before us, and our practices of grief and mourning will help us to know what we should devote our lives to next as the loss continues. We need practices of awe to hearten us on our communal journey. As I go to meditate on the shores of Lake Michigan almost every night, my heart is buoyed by the power and beauty of this, my sister, as she provides in reciprocity for my family. The moon, as it sometimes gleams a path across the lake. Even to have seen this summer the northern lights, the greens and their pinks just below the Big Dipper. That overwhelming beauty reminds me of my place in the universe and that I am very small in the midst of something so remarkably and resplendently adorned. This practice also reminds me I am not alone, allows my critical mind to be stilled at times, to live in necessary doubt and ambiguity, and it encourages me to struggle and fight for the goodness and beauty that remains in abundance. Before he was a New York Times journalist, Dar Jamal was effectively a Sherpa on Mount Denali in Alaska. When leading a group, he broke through an ice bridge, and he hung perilously, not knowing whether his climbing mates would consider trying to lift him up as too much of a risk to the lives of them all. So there he hung, hypothermia beginning to set in, face to face with the great glacier, its deep blue calming him. As his climbing mates hauled him out of what could have been his tomb to thankfully stand atop the glacier, he looked out at the raw beauty all around him, gazed up at a mountain to the west, behind which the sun was just setting, snow clearly streaming off one of its ranges turned into ruddy red ribbons by the setting sun. Snowflakes flickered as they floated into space, him being utterly overwhelmed by being alive. It's surrounded by the beauty of the mountain world. In that moment, Jamal realized the heartbreaking loss he was experiencing, that suffering and grief were now going to be a part of the calamitous climate decline. He believed his grief opened within him an innate intelligence of the heart as he began to wonder, in accordance with indigenous wisdom, what are my obligations? Knowing what is happening to the planet, to what do I devote my life? To what do we devote our lives? Wonder is that question we ask ourselves as we emerge from this visceral age to imagine what we might be. What science fiction might we have to create for further work to join as partners with each other and with this good earth to co-create a new reality? we begin, we wonder why, or I wonder if, and that curiosity moves us forward. Arundhati Roy wrote of that time created by the pandemic, calling it a portal. She wrote, "We can choose to walk through that portal, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world, and ready to fight for it." Sisters and brothers, siblings and cousins of First Unitarian Church in South Bend, are you ready? It is already happening. Are we ready to join with others to piece together an intergenerational, multiracial, multicultural commons, and another, and another? Are we ready to hold out our hands to others in this good earth in solidarity, to continue and to develop practices of grief, awe, and wonder? In our grit and courage, are we ready to fight for it? A commons, solidarity, practices of grief, awe, and wonder. I wonder what we might do together. May it be so. Amen.